A few years ago, your paycheck felt very different.
Today, that same paycheck somehow buys much less.
Most people feel it, even if they can't explain why. Coffee costs more. Groceries cost more. Rent costs more. Insurance costs more. Even fast food isn't cheap anymore. Yet economists keep saying inflation is falling.
So why doesn't anything actually feel cheaper?
The answer surprises almost everyone. Because inflation isn't what most people think it is. Many people believe lower inflation means lower prices. But that's not how inflation actually works. Lower inflation simply means prices are rising more slowly. Prices can keep rising even while inflation falls. That's the first misunderstanding almost everyone has. But it's only the beginning of the story. To understand prices, we need to follow a single loaf of bread. Its journey begins long before it reaches the supermarket. Farmers first need seeds, fuel, fertilizer, and machinery. Every one of those inputs became more expensive. That higher cost doesn't simply disappear. Someone eventually has to pay for it. Usually, that someone is the customer. Now imagine this happening across the entire economy. Millions of products are following the exact same path. One higher cost creates another, and another. That's why rising prices spread through the economy so quickly. But here's the question nobody asks. Who actually benefits from all of this? If everything becomes more expensive, someone must be benefiting. The answer isn't as simple as most people think. Let's begin with the companies producing everyday products. Their costs suddenly begin rising from every direction. Raw materials become more expensive. Transportation becomes more expensive. Energy becomes more expensive. Businesses have only a few possible choices. They can absorb the costs. They can reduce their profits. Or they can raise prices. Many businesses choose a combination of all three. That's why prices rarely move in just one direction. But businesses aren't the only part of the story. Now, let's talk about borrowing. When borrowing becomes cheap, spending usually increases. More spending often means stronger demand. But supply can't always grow just as quickly. That's where prices often begin climbing. Now, imagine this happening across thousands of industries. This isn't just about groceries anymore. Housing becomes more expensive. Transportation becomes more expensive. Healthcare becomes more expensive. Education becomes more expensive. Eventually, higher costs become part of everyday life. That's why inflation feels personal. It quietly affects almost every financial decision you make. But there's one group of people watching inflation very differently. And understanding why changes everything. When prices rise, not everyone experiences the economy the same way. Some people mainly own income. Others mainly own assets. That difference changes everything over the long term. Imagine owning a house before prices begin rising. As housing becomes more expensive, your property may also increase in value. The same idea often applies to businesses, and sometimes even shares of successful companies. Assets don't always rise, but many can respond differently than cash. Cash loses purchasing power when prices keep increasing. That's why investors pay so much attention to inflation. But inflation isn't the only force changing the economy. Interest rates quietly influence almost every financial decision. When borrowing becomes expensive, spending often slows down. Businesses may invest less during those periods. Consumers may also postpone major purchases. The economy gradually begins cooling down. That cooling helps reduce inflation over time. But lower inflation doesn't erase yesterday's higher prices. That's why many people still feel financially squeezed. Now comes the question that changes how most people see money forever. Here's the part almost nobody talks about. A world with zero inflation isn't automatically a perfect world. Economies are constantly changing every single day. People change jobs, companies expand, and new technologies appear. Money has to move through that changing economy. That's one reason central banks watch inflation so closely. Their goal is usually stability, not endlessly rising prices. Too much inflation creates serious problems. But falling prices can also create difficult challenges. People may delay purchases if they expect lower prices tomorrow. Businesses notice that hesitation almost immediately. That can slow investment and hiring. Every economic decision creates another chain of consequences. That's why managing an economy is never simple. Every decision involves difficult trade-offs. There is rarely one perfect solution. That's why economists often disagree with each other. But they all study the same fundamental question. How do we keep an economy growing without losing stability? And the answer begins with understanding money itself. Let's go back to the question we started with. Why does everything still feel so expensive? Because prices and inflation are not the same thing. Lower inflation doesn't erase yesterday's higher prices. It only means prices are rising more slowly than before. That's why many families still feel under financial pressure. Understanding the system doesn't make life cheaper overnight, but it helps explain what's really happening around us. The economy isn't controlled by a single switch. It's millions of individual decisions happening every single day. Every purchase becomes part of a much larger system. Every paycheck continues another part of that story. Money is constantly moving, even when we don't notice it. And that's what keeps modern economies alive. The next time you buy something, you'll probably see it differently. Behind every price is an entire chain of people and decisions. And behind every dollar is a much bigger story than most people imagine. That's why understanding money means understanding the world. Now I'm curious about your experience. What has become dramatically more expensive where you live over the past 5 years? Tell us in the comments. And what financial mystery should we uncover next?